Boker Tov, continuing with Shaare Teshuva from Rabbenu Yona. We're in Shaar HaRishon, principles of Teshuva. We're going to begin now. We're on Sif Yud Bet, which is the third principle. So it's important to explain that we saw in the Rambam, and we have to clarify that the most basic, fundamental, bare and bones of Teshuva, as brought down by Halakha and the Rambam, and as Rabbenu Yona will agree to later on, are what we explained previously. Charata, Azivat Achet, and Vidui. Regret for what we've done, forsaking and leaving, stopping to sin, and Vidui. Rabbenu Yona agrees that these three elements, or these two parts of principles plus Vidui, are the bare core requirements to achieve Teshuvah. For the rest of this Shar, I think Rabbenu Yona is going to now explain more principles of Teshuvah that enable and that help us achieve higher and higher levels of Teshuvah. Again, we've explained many times, Teshuvah is not binary. It's not all or nothing. There are degrees and levels that we can achieve and attain our Teshuvah. This Rabbenu Yona, his Sefer, helps us climb that ladder of getting to higher and higher levels. So the next three seifim, Yud Bet till Yudalid, will discuss this third principle of Teshuvah. HaShelishi, HaYagon. The third principle, says Rabbenu Yona, is grief, is Yagon. Yishtonen kilyotav v'yachshov. One should arouse his conscience to contemplate Kama rabba ra'at misheimra et yitzrotzro. How terrible it is for someone who defied his creator by violating any of his words. V'yagdil Yagon bilvavo v'sar mitcholel berayonav v'yanach b'mirut lev. Then, based on this contemplation, based on this everyday, I added the everyday part, based on the self-reflection, he shall what? The grief will grow in his heart, a storm will brew in his thoughts, and he will sigh with bitterness of heart over his sins. Again, this is not a requirement, as we've explained. It's higher levels, how to achieve the best possible level of Teshuvah. Rabbenu Yona has defined the principle of grief as essentially being a profound and intense form of regret. He now explains why it's necessary for a person to proceed beyond basic regret. Okay? So he explains that it's similar to regret, but why is it not just regret? Why is it not just charata? What's the difference between yagon and charata? So Rabbenu Yona explains, Ki yitachen sheyitracharet v'yera be'enav al chatato asher chata v'lo yishlim chuko bazeh. For it is possible that one has come to regret and feel bad about the sin that he committed, yet he still has not fulfilled his requirements. Good? Of Teshuvah with this. 1 second. Okay, good. It's possible that someone has charata, has regret, and is upset at what he's done, but did not achieve the highest level of Teshuvah. How so? Gam Kiev said dinar o isar yikshe be'nei adam. For the fact is that even a minor financial loss in the amount of a dinar or isar, these are different currencies. The isar is 1/24 of a dinar, whatever. Okay, is somewhat uncomfortable and distressing to a person and cause regret. But if someone lost $1 versus someone lost his entire fortune in a bad way that wiped clean all his assets, he won't just regret the loss. Nafsho alav te'eval v'tichbad anachto v'nafsho maralo. Rather, his soul will mourn over it, his sighing will be heavy, and his soul will be bitter within him. It's a fascinating analogy. There are degrees of people who suffer, correct? There's regret that I lost $1. Hey, I regret making that mistake. I sent $100 to this person on memo, he stole my money, I regret making that mistake. Okay, that's regret. But now someone who, God forbid, loses $10,000, $100,000, his entire inventory gets stolen, God forbid, bar minan, what happens? That's not just regret. It's going to be this mourning, this bitterness that it's going to be difficult for him to wake up from. Likewise, if a person suffers many severe troubles, his pain is everlasting, his grief and his grief fills his heart every day. An even greater degree of pain and sighing than just described is appropriate. Someone who suffers affliction, suffers many problems, he's not just going to have a basic regret, he's going to have grief, he's going to be in pain. Okay? Similarly, someone who defiled the will of Hashem and acted corruptly and to'ivot and as an abomination before him, and what throughout this process he did not remember and internalize and realize that he is dealing with not a random person. Hashem is the creator of the world. He created yesh me'ayin. He created something out of nothing and granted him life and much kindness. Whose hand guides him constantly and who preserves his soul within every moment. Hashem didn't just create the world and let it run autopilot. Every second he's actively recreating and actively reestablishing and giving us a breath. Every second he decides to give us the ability to breathe every second. It's not automatic. Every second, every breath is Hashem actively deciding that I want to give this person another breath. And all of these levels of how much big Hashem. How could we have dared to provoke his anger before Hashem? And how could the sinner's eyes have been sealed and prevented from seeing, his heart comprehending? If one is a wise person whose eyes are open to the truth, he will engrave these ideas on his heart and will penetrate to the inner chambers of his spirit. This is what's called grief. This is called Yagon. It's the third level principle of Teshuvah that Rabbenu Yona discusses. He continues, and we'll try to do it quickly. He elaborates on the value of grief as why it's a necessary component of Teshuvah. The levels of Teshuvah one attains and the spiritual advantage of one gains from his Teshuvah depends on the degree of one's bitterness and the intensity of someone's sins. Rabbenu stated above in Seif Tet that every level of Teshuvah is effective in gaining some degree of atonement. We said this 1,000,000 times. It's not binary, it's not all or nothing. There are degrees to Teshuvah. As long as a person fulfills the basic requirement, we said this again, of regret, forsaking sin, and vidui, he has quote-unquote done Teshuvah and will receive atonement. However, there are even higher spiritual levels to which one can arise through Teshuvah. The Gemara in Yoma teaches Teshuvah is great as it reaches until the throne of glory. And it further teaches in Berachot, in a place where Baalei Teshuvah stand, the perfectly righteous people cannot stand. So we see that there's degrees. The Chazal teach us that there's obviously different levels and degrees of Teshuvah. It's not just all or nothing. So this is a component that makes up the higher levels of Teshuvah, based on your bitterness and the intensity of our grief. Via Teshuvah asher tavo miderech Torah hanefesh v'zakut sichla. That is because this aspect of grief is the aspect of Teshuvah that is a product of purity of the soul and refinement of its intellect. For in accordance with one's level of intellect and with the extent by which one's eyes are open to the idea mentioned above, that by sinning he defiled the will of the Creator, who nurtures and sustains him constantly, Yirbu v'ya'atzmu bim'od me'od, Yegonav b'rayonav al rov avonav. That his inner grief over his many sins will grow and intensify to ever greater degrees. Since grief emanates from a purified soul, what's the source of someone who grieves over his avonot? When we grieve, we're not grieving over a loss of money, we're grieving that we distance ourselves from God, that we made Hashem quote-unquote upset, we made Hashem angry, we didn't do the will of God. This grief stems from a purity of our neshamot, stems from a amazing source. Rabbenu Yona quotes a pasuk now that Teshuvah experience in the soul is more important in gaining complete forgiveness. As it says in Yeshayahu, for I will not quarrel forever, nor I will be eternally wrathful when the spirit from before me aches and the soul I made. Be'iro, which means kasher ya'atof When a person's spirits ache and is tormented by its sins, the person that comes from before me, since it emanates from the heavenly realms, and the souls that I made likewise ache, at that point I will no longer quarrel with the inner sin to seek to punish him, nor will wrath towards him. For how can I not be merciful and not show favor to this precious spirit that comes before me, and the souls that I have made? Thus, in the aching of the spirit and the soul, that brings forgiveness and favor, says Rabbenu Yona, where we'll continue with this seif and this idea tomorrow. That Hashem, have a wonderful day.